Welcome to Washington Today for Friday, March 25th, 2022. I'm Nkoyo Iyamba. Here are some of today's headlines. President Biden announced that the United States would increase gas exports to the European Union in a bid to reduce reliance on Russian energy. And President Biden met with troops from the 82nd Airborne in Poland. The troops are there to assist with NATO defense and the humanitarian situation on the ground as millions of Ukrainian refugees flee the war. Meanwhile, about 300 people were killed in the Russian airstrike last week on a Mariupol theater that was being used as a shelter. Ukrainian authorities announced that Friday, in what would make it the world's deadliest known attack on civilians yet. More on the war in Ukraine in a moment. Yemen's Houthi rebels attacked an oil depot on Friday in the Saudi city of Jeddah, ahead of a Formula One race in the kingdom. It's their highest profile assault yet that threatened to disrupt the upcoming Grand Prix. The attacks come as Saudi Arabia still leads a coalition battling the Iran-backed Houthis, who seized Yemen's capital of Sana'a in September 2014. Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown-Jackson is facing a shrinking pool of potential GOP supporters for her Supreme Court confirmation as Republicans harden their opposition. We'll hear more about who's backing her and who's not. We begin in Brussels, Belgium, where President Biden, appearing with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, announced that the U.S. and EU would work together to cut Europe's reliance on Russian energy. President Biden offered a major expansion of natural gas shipments to his European Union counterpart.
Today, we've agreed on a joint game plan toward that goal, while accelerating our progress toward a secure, clean energy future. This initiative focuses on two core issues. One, helping Europe reduce its dependency on Russian gas as quickly as possible. And secondly, reducing Europe's demand for gas overall. To address the first point, the United States, together with our international partners, we're going to work to ensure an additional 15 billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas, LNG, for Europe this year. And as the EU works to discontinue it buying Russian gas well before 2030, it will also work to ensure additional EU market demand for 50 billion cubic meters of LNG from the United States annually by 2030. To accomplish this, the European Commission is going to work with the member states to store gas across the continent, to build more infrastructure to receive LNG, and to take steps to increase the efficiency of gas. This build-out will occur in a way that is consistent with, not in conflict with, the net zero climate goal that we're shooting for. It's going to take some time to adjust gas supply chains and infrastructure that is built for the last decade. So we're going to have to make sure that families in Europe can get through this winter and the next while we're building an infrastructure for a diversified, resilient, and clean energy future. At the same time, this crisis also presents an opportunity. It's a catalyst that will drive the investments we need to double down on our clean energy goals and accelerate progress toward our net zero emissions future. That's what the second part of this initiative is all about. The United States and the European Union are going to work together to take concrete measures to reduce dependence on natural gas, period, and to maximize the availability and use of renewable energy. We're going to accelerate widespread adoption of energy-efficient technologies and equipment like smart thermostats, work to electrify heating systems all across Europe. We're going to invest in innovative solutions and technologies to make the switch from fossil fuels. And together, we'll advance the use of clean and renewable hydrogen to reduce our carbon emissions. These steps will increase energy security, economic security, and national security. And we're going to stand up a joint task force to implement these changes and drive progress that will be co-chaired by representatives from the White House and the President of the European Union's team, the Commission's team. Madam President, I know that eliminating Russian gas will have costs for Europe, But it's not only the right thing to do from a moral standpoint, it's going to put us on a much stronger strategic footing.
President Biden in Brussels speaking alongside European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Russia supplies around 40% of Europe's gas needs. The EU is aiming to cut its dependency on Russian gas by 2/3 this year and end all Russian fossil fuel imports by 2027 due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin used author J.K. Rowling as an example of Western cancel culture, which he said is currently being aimed at Russia. Here's Russian President Vladimir Putin speaking through a translator.
In Hollywood, they avoided films even when they made films where the only winner, the country that defeated fascism, was the United States, and didn't say anything about the Red Army. But if you look at the number of military units fighting in the East, that was the Russian units. So they just canceled the contribution of the Red Army into the defeat of the Nazis. And in Japan, they don't even mention who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or they just say it was done by some abstract allies. And the fact that it was the United States who did such an awful slaughter at the end of the war, this fact is not even mentioned. So they just cancelled cynically this truth. They cancelled Joan Rowling recently, the children's author. Her books are published all over the world, even just because she didn't satisfy the demands of gender rights. They're not trying to cancel our country. I'm talking about the progressive discrimination of everything to do with Russia, this trend that's unfolding in a number of Western states, with the full neglect, sometimes encouragement of Western cultures. They're now engaging in cancel culture.
In response, author J.K. Rowling tweeted a BBC story about Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny and wrote, quote, "Critics of Western cancel culture are possibly not best made by those currently slaughtering civilians for the crime of resistance or who jail and poison their critics," end quote. So how did we get here? How could more have been done to prevent Putin's invasion of Ukraine? In an interview with Washington Post national security reporter Missy Ryan, Latvian President Egil Levits says, yes. Here's that conversation.
Do you think that Putin's actions in Ukraine could have been prevented if the West, if NATO, had had a stronger response to the 2008 invasion in Georgia, the actions in Crimea? Do you think that perhaps it was the lack of more unity, of a stronger economic or security response that encouraged Putin to take these steps?
Yes, I agree with this appreciation. If NATO or Western alliance, Western country would react earlier, 2008, when Russia attacked Georgia, 2014, when Russia attacked Ukraine the first time and annexed one part of Ukrainian territory, if the reaction would be stronger, then, of course, we would not have this war today. So this is a failure of Western alliance 8 years ago, 14 years ago, and we should not repeat this failure. I would say, in general, if we are looking on in history, then appeasement politics towards aggressive imperialistic autocratic states are not fruitful. We see that 38, when Western countries betrayed Czechoslovakia and Hitler could occupy it was not enough for him. It led to the Second World War. So I would say today we don't have Chamberlains. We need more Churchills.
President of Latvia, Egil Levits, in a Washington Post Live interview. We turn now to the news of one of the members of the Supreme Court. Justice Clarence Thomas was discharged from the hospital Friday after a nearly week-long stay. That's according to a court spokesperson. He was treated for an infection with flu-like symptoms with intravenous antibiotics. The court said Justice Thomas did not have COVID-19. He has been vaccinated and boosted like the rest of the court. Justice Thomas is being released, though, from the hospital amid ethics scrutiny after recent reports show that his wife, Ginny, aggressively worked to overturn the 2020 election. Meanwhile, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is facing a shrinking pool of potential GOP supporters for her Supreme Court confirmation. That's as Republicans harden their opposition. Republican senators say this week's confirmation hearings did little to win over their members. Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn released a video with this message.
This week I had the opportunity to ask Judge Jackson, who's been nominated to a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court, some questions about her judicial philosophy. There's no question that Judge Jackson has had a very rich and broad experience in the law, having been a federal district judge, currently being a judge on the Court of Appeals, being a public defender, working in the private sector. But really the question is, how does she see her role as a judge? The reason that's so important is because the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence itself recognizes that government's powers are derived from the consent of the governed. Federal judges are not elected. We can't vote them out of office. We can't indicate our disapproval of their rulings. And we've seen increasingly sort of this arrogation of power by the Supreme Court in a number of areas, which have radically changed our country and eliminated the opportunity for average citizens to have input and influence on the laws that govern us. I'm very concerned that she will be one of the members of the court that does lean toward legislating from the bench. She did not seem to appreciate the concern that I expressed, this blind spot, if you will, for staying in your lane, as she called it. So we'll continue to consider the judge's nomination next week, and I expect by maybe about April the 4th, we'll end up voting on the judge in committee and then on the floor of the United States Senate.
Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn. Meanwhile, West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin said Friday that he will vote for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's Supreme Court nomination. In a statement, he wrote, quote, "After meeting with her, considering her record, and closely monitoring her testimony and questioning before the Senate Judiciary Committee this week, I have determined I intend to vote for her nomination to serve on the Supreme Court," end quote. That's what Manchin wrote in a statement. Democrats can confirm Judge Jackson without any Republican support if all 50 of their members are united and Vice President Harris breaks a tie. But they are hoping for at least one yes vote from a Republican. Earlier, Amy Howe, SCOTUS blog co-founder and reporter, spoke to C-SPAN about what's next for Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson.
I think the answer to your first question, did she gain or lose Senate votes, is we don't really know. It seems unlikely. We don't know what was happening outside the committee is the short answer with senators who are not on the committee. When she was confirmed just less than a year ago to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, which everyone regards as sort of the second highest court in the land, she got 3 Republican votes: Senator Susan Collins of Maine, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. Senator Graham's the only one who is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it seemed pretty plain after the hearings that he is unlikely to vote for Judge Jackson this time around, but we don't know about the other 2 Republican senators. And then, as far as whether she's on track to be confirmed, it seems pretty likely that she is. It's going to be a very narrow margin. It could be a very polarized vote along party lines, but even some Republican senators on the committee, like Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, who didn't suggest necessarily that he was going to vote for her, but really talked about her confirmation as if it was inevitable. There was a line at one point when he was questioning her, where he said, "You're going to be a hero."
In the history of confirmation hearings, how often does it happen that something comes up that derails a nominee after the nominee sits before the committee? Is there still time here for something to change dramatically?
There is. We haven't had, we certainly saw that with now Justice Brett Kavanaugh. We had the initial set of confirmation hearings, and then it reconvened after the allegations by Christine Blasey Ford became public, and we had another day of hearings, and then the vote went forward, and he was eventually confirmed, largely along a party line vote. We certainly haven't had any indication that there's anything that's going to come out that might derail her confirmation. She's already been confirmed to various federal positions as a sentencing commissioner, as a district court judge, and quite recently as a court of appeals judge. So 3 times, including once quite recently. And in addition to the fact that she's just very highly qualified, many people thought that that was one of the reasons why she was such a front runner for the nomination all along. The Biden administration, is keenly aware that the Democrats could lose control of the Senate in the 2022 elections in November, and they wanted to be sure that they could get someone confirmed. And she's been confirmed very, very recently, and they wanted to make sure that there were no surprises.
In terms of how much time is left, can you just take us through the schedule here for her confirmation?
So my understanding is that they are going to have sort of move forward, starting in the next, I think, April 4th. They're going to be back in committee. And so it's a little bit unusual because Justice Stephen Breyer has already said that he would like to remain on the Supreme Court through the end of the Supreme Court's term. The justices are still hearing oral arguments. They just finished up an argument session this week. They'll hear another set of oral arguments in April, and then they'll issue all of their decisions for the current term by the end of the June. So Breyer has said he'd like to remain on the bench until the end of June, and then he would step down, and if she were confirmed, then Justice Jackson would replace him, presumably in late June or early July. But I think that the Senate Democrats have said they'd like to have her, the vote happen by Easter, before the senators go away for their Easter break. And so essentially she'd be waiting in the wings. All that would be left to do would be for the president to sign her commission, so that as soon as Justice Breyer stepped down in late June or early July, she could step in. They don't want to leave anything to chance in case something were to happen, with one of the senators that would jeopardize their ability to get her confirmed.
I want to get your view on the confirmation hearings as a whole, and maybe not just this one, but the past couple. Are these confirmation hearings, is this process in your mind still a good way of figuring out the motivations of a justice, for the public finding out about the history of a potential justice? Are they still working?
I think it's a good question, and I think in part it depends on the perspective from which how you're coming at it. On the one hand, in recent years, there's been a trend towards nominees telling us relatively little about how they would vote on a particular issue. We didn't hear the phrase during this confirmation hearing. We heard it a lot during the confirmation hearing for now Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and in some of the earlier confirmation hearings, the Ginsburg rule, the idea that a nominee for the Supreme Court isn't going to weigh in on issues that could come before them, because that might make them seem biased if they were then confirmed to the Supreme Court and the issue were to come up. It would seem as if they had already prejudged the issue. And that dates back to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg during her confirmation hearing in 1993, when she said she would give no hints, no forecasts, no previews. Now, a couple of journalists, including Nina Totenberg of National Public Radio, have done stories on this. Justice Ginsburg, during her confirmation hearing, actually said quite a bit about some really substantive issues, including the right to an abortion. But in any event, I think you have to separate sort of how they might vote on particular issues and what we learn about them more broadly, what comes out in the process. And even if they're not giving, hints, forecast previews about how they might vote on a particular issue, and, what perhaps senators and journalists and people who really, before going into the hearing, have spent a lot of time reading all of, in the case of Judge Jackson, all of their opinions, in the case of now Justice Kavanaugh, reading all of his emails and, opinions as a Court of Appeals judge, versus what the public, who, doesn't necessarily have time to read all of these things, what the public learns about a nominee. They do learn a lot more about the issues facing the court, how this nominee has decided these issues in the past, about the candidate's demeanor. In this case, Judge Jackson sat there, pretty implacable, as there were sometimes during a roller coaster of senators asking her questions and sometimes speaking quite strongly, and so you even if you're not learning how she feels about gun rights or abortion, you do still learn quite a bit about her. So I think sort of your view on whether or not the hearings serve their function kind of depends on what you think their function is.
From Friday's Washington Journal, SCOTUS blog co-founder and reporter Amy Howe. You can listen to the entire interview on cspan.org/Washington Journal. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There's been much more recognition of the historic contributions of America's First Ladies in recent years. So join us as C-SPAN takes you through the White House experiences of 8 modern First Ladies, from Lady Bird Johnson to Melania Trump. Using material from C-SPAN's award-winning biography series, First Ladies, and source material from the C-SPAN video library, you'll hear these first spouses talk about the issues important to them while in the White House. First Ladies in their own words. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Here are more headlines. A federal jury in Los Angeles has convicted Jeff Fortenberry of 3 felony counts for lying to FBI about a 2016 foreign campaign contribution. The 9-term Nebraska Republican congressman was found guilty of scheming to falsify and conceal material facts, along with 2 counts of making false statements to federal investigators. We'll hear reaction from Republican leaders in just a moment. A majority of Americans say they don't blame President Joe Biden for high gasoline prices, but they're giving his economic leadership low marks. That's amid fears of inflation and deep pessimism about economic condition. According to a new poll from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, about 7 in 10 Americans say the nation's economy is in bad shape, and close to 2/3 disapprove of Biden's handling of the economy. The poll hints at a paradox in which the public views Biden as being in power without necessarily being in control. House Republicans wrapped up their annual retreat in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, finishing up a 3-day event discussing their goals ahead of the 2022 midterm elections. We'll hear more about their messages and plans coming up. We continue now in Washington, D.C. at the Atlantic Council, where White House National Cyber Director Chris Inglis warned of security challenges that are facing the U.S. and what we need to do to prepare.
Think of campaigns, not salvos, right? When you think about the solution, understand that your first kind of point of approach, your first point of attack, if you want to use that term, perhaps is going to be understood and addressed by the adversary. And you need to think about what you're going to do in phase 2, in phase 3, and phase 4. You need to be able to measure what results you've actually accrued with your first set of activities, understand whether they made the difference intended, and then reapproach the problem and then have something more to do. Don't leave any loose ends in that regard. And finally, when you're all done, make sure that you give some pause and time for the panel to ask you questions, and be prepared. Have the branches and sequels in your mind so that you can answer those questions and do what's necessary in that regard.
White House National Cyber Director Chris Inglis in a virtual discussion at the Atlantic Council. Top House leaders of both parties are calling on Nebraska Republican Representative Jeff Fortenberry to resign. Representative Fortenberry was found guilty on Thursday of concealing information and lying to federal authorities in regard to an investigation looking into illegal campaign contributions in his 2016 re-election campaign. That's according to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Central District of California. Speaking at the House Republican annual retreat in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy spoke about Representative Fortenberry. Here's what he had to say.
I'm going to discuss with him today. I think he had his day in court, and I think if he wants to appeal, he can go do that as a private citizen. But I think out of respect, you can let me talk to him today. But I think when someone's convicted, it's time to resign.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy also spoke on the House Republicans' future plans.
The two biggest threats long-term to America is our debt and China. Okay? So what are we going to do to solve that? Well, we've got to get our debt under control. It's driving inflation. How do we balance it? How do we pay it off? Well, if we set a budget and we stick to it year after year, well, then you also have a concern, what about our military? Okay. But you can't just keep throwing money at the military. We should be reforming the military where our dollars go further. So it's continual improvement in everything you go. We just went through a pandemic. We looked at government from a different perspective. How can government be held more accountable but provide better services? You had people who came into work or not. How do we use technology to get a better environment but actually be able to produce more that we were able to do and lower the cost? But how do we use technology to provide service to the public? Think for a moment. We've had these challenges in the VA where these veterans can't get an appointment. But America looks on their phone, picks an app and gets an Uber, rates the driver, they rate them and get everything on. Why couldn't we create technology where a veteran could go online, get their appointment, rate their doctor, and have the technology? That's why we're spending time at MIT, right? How can we use AI, artificial intelligence, to provide greater health care to individuals to know what tests they should have and when they should have it? They can give us the data back. Or quantum, right? How are we as elected officials making those decisions? How do we turn an Intel committee that just purely became political under the Democrats, that missed what happened in Afghanistan, missed what's happening in Ukraine, based upon a chairman that took his position that he got more information than others, and then lied to the American public? Well, what do we do there? We take, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we can say, if you want to serve on that committee, I've got a whole program created, a class from MIT focusing on the real concerns that we have. So we're better as a nation prepared. That's how.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy speaking at the House Republican annual retreat in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. The Biden administration announced that it will host the White House Easter egg roll this year. It's the first time in 3 years since the coronavirus pandemic. The Easter egg roll will take place on April 18th on the South Lawn. The White House also announced that it will continue the annual tradition of opening the White House gardens and South grounds for public tours. The announcement comes as several Washington, D.C. institutions are resuming public tours. A reminder that all of our coverage is online anytime at cspan.org. And if you missed any of this program, you can find it at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, delivered daily right to your inbox, you can subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Nkoyo Iyamba. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we're taking your calls, live, on the air, on the news of the day. And we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Saturday morning, Politico defense reporter Paul McCleary on the latest involving Russia's invasion of Ukraine and President Biden's meetings with NATO allies. Then E&E News reporter Mike Sorhan talks about oil and gas drilling and the Biden administration's energy policies. And Jimmy Hoover and Natalie Rodriguez, co-hosts of Law 360's The Term podcast, discuss their program and Ketanji Brown Jackson's Supreme Court confirmation hearings. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Saturday morning. on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.